I arrived in Pompeii at sunrise. No one knew they had one day left. From a distance, the city looked peaceful, rooftops catching the first light, narrow streets still half in shadow, and Mount Vesuvius standing quietly beyond it all. There was no warning in the air, no panic, no sense that history was waiting just above the horizon. Only another morning. Inside the city, the first streets were quieter than I expected. The stones were uneven underfoot. Painted walls were fading from sun and dust. A shopkeeper was opening his doorway. Someone swept the front of a house. A dog wandered past like it owned the street. This was not the Pompeii of ruins. It was still alive. At the fountain, the day had already begun. People arrived with jars and waited their turn, exchanging a few words before carrying water back through the streets. In a city like this, water shaped the rhythm of the morning. Before the markets, before the baths, before the noise of the day, people came here first. The bakers had been awake much longer than I had. Inside one bakery, the air was warm and thick with flour. The millstones were heavy. The oven glowed in the dim light. Men worked quickly, shaping dough while the rest of the city was still waking. Bread was not a detail here. It was the foundation of the day. When the first loaves came out, the room changed. The smell filled everything: smoke, heat, grain, ash. For a moment, it was easy to forget what would happen here tomorrow. There was only bread and work and the small satisfaction of a morning task done well. By mid-morning, the food counters were busy. At a thermopolium, people leaned over the counter, eating quickly, talking loudly, moving on. Many homes had small kitchens, or none at all, so places like this were part of everyday life. Pompeii was not a silent marble city. It was hot food, shouted orders, cheap meals, and neighbors passing close enough to touch. In one narrow street, I saw children playing in the dust. They ran between doorways, watched by adults who seemed only half interested. Their world was this street, these walls, these sounds. It was one of the hardest things to see. Not because anything was wrong, because everything looked normal. As the sun rose higher, the market streets filled. Baskets of fruit, fish, bread, cloth, pottery, all of it set out in the open air. People argued over prices. Merchants called to passers-by. Workers pushed through the crowd with goods balanced on shoulders and carts waiting behind them. The city had become a machine of small exchanges. Up close, the details were everywhere. A hand passing coins, figs piled in a basket, oil jars stacked against a wall, bread wrapped and carried away. Every object had been touched, weighed, sold, reused. The ancient world often feels distant until you see how practical it was. I found a laundry workshop tucked into the movement of the city. Cloth hung from lines. Workers bent over basins. The smell was strong. This was not beautiful work, but it was necessary work, the kind of labor that made respectable life possible for someone else. Pompeii was full of these hidden systems. The streets themselves carried the memory of daily use. Cartwheels had cut grooves into the stone. Stepping stones helped pedestrians cross above mud and waste. People moved around each other constantly. Walkers, animals, carts, merchants, slaves, children. It was crowded in a way ruins can no longer show. Then, in the middle of an ordinary street, a small shrine. Someone paused there with an offering. Nothing grand, nothing theatrical, just a brief gesture toward the gods before returning to the day. Religion here was not separate from life. It lived in corners, thresholds, meals, business, fear, and habit. Inside a modest home, the city became quieter. The room was small. The furniture was simple. Food was being prepared in the half-light. A family moved around each other with the practiced ease of people who knew exactly how little space they had. Most lives here were not luxurious. They were close, practical, and crowded. But Pompeii also had another face. In a wealthy house, light fell into an open atrium. Painted walls surrounded a pool of water. Servants moved quietly through the rooms. The air was cooler here, the space more controlled. A few streets could separate very different worlds. Outside again, I stopped at a workshop. A craftsman bent over his tools, focused on a task repeated countless times before. Around him, the street kept moving. Customers, neighbors, deliveries, noise. This was one of the things that struck me most. How much of the city was work, not history, not drama, just work. At midday, the taverns grew louder. Men talked over cups and food. Some looked tired. Some looked amused. Some seemed to be avoiding the rest of the day for as long as possible. The conversations are lost to us now, but standing there, they didn't feel lost. They felt immediate. In the Forum, Pompeii opened into public life. People came to do business, settle matters, meet friends, be seen. The architecture was formal, but the life inside it was messy and human. A city is never only its buildings, it is the movement between them. Everywhere women carried the day forward. Shopping, preparing food, watching children, managing households, moving through streets that were not always easy or safe. Much of this work would never be carved into monuments. But without it, the city would have stopped before noon. I kept noticing the weight people carried: jars, baskets, tools, bundles of cloth. Some carried them because it was their trade, some because they had no choice. The Roman world could be impressive. It could also be hard, unequal, and exhausting. Pompeii was no exception. By afternoon, people drifted toward the baths. The baths were more than a place to wash. They were social rooms, business rooms, places to linger and talk and be part of the city. After the heat and dust of the streets, I understood why people came. Later, the city slowed. People rested in shade. Animals stood still. The light became heavy on the walls. Even the streets seemed to pause. This was the part of the day when Pompeii felt most ordinary, not dramatic, not famous, just tired. As evening came, the city changed again. Lamps began to glow. Food was served from counters. People gathered in smaller groups. The noise softened, but it did not disappear. Pompeii was settling into the kind of evening every city knows. Inside one home, a family ate by lamplight. The scene was simple: food, shadows, low voices, the end of a long day. Nothing about it asked to be remembered. And yet this is exactly what I wanted to remember. Not the disaster, the life before it. By night, many doors were closed. A few lamps still burned. The streets were darker now, quieter, more uncertain. Somewhere behind the walls, people slept, argued, prayed, held children, counted money, prepared for tomorrow. Tomorrow, of course, would not be the day they imagined. Before I left, I looked back at the city under the mountain. Pompeii was still warm with scattered lights. The streets were still intact. The bread had been baked. The water had been carried. The shops had opened and closed. Families had gone to sleep. History often remembers Pompeii as a disaster, but on this last ordinary day, it was something else. It was a city full of people who thought they had more time. If this journey made the past feel a little closer, subscribe for the next one. And tell me where I should travel next. There are many lost mornings still waiting to be seen.